Hey guys, welcome back to Spool Monster TV. As you can tell, the 6 liter is back together. It's running good. I've got about 5,000 miles on the truck since the head gaskets. I know it's been a while since I've done a video. I've just been busy with work and that, so I figured I'd do a quick update. I guess I'll start with the assembly. I had 2 issues. Both of them were my fault, obviously, because I put it back together. But I had a rocker bolt break on the passenger side. So basically you've got the head bolt or stud if you put studs in it, and then there's 2 8mm bolts that keep the rocker from like pivoting, and they're only 30 foot-pounds. So I use like an old style, like a click style torque wrench, which I've used. They still work fine, but the one I had probably was not that accurate. So it was like on I don't know, second one back, I broke it. I was able to get it back out, which was good, because if I had to drill that out and mess with that would have took a long time to retap it and all that. So I ended up just putting the broken piece back in and spinning it out with a cordless ratchet. There was enough bite on it to spin it back out. So that was the first issue. The second problem was I kind of heard it while it was running, like when it during initial startup on it. It kind of had like a knock, like very light, and after about 10-15 minutes of idling, it started knocking really bad. And what it ended up being was the rocker on the driver's side all the way to the back, I believe it's the exhaust, kicked off of the bridge. So like most diesels, they have, or actually most engines now, have 4 valves per cylinder. So you've got what's called a bridge, and the bridge jumps the 2 valves together, and then that rocker just pushes on the middle of that, and the rocker basically kicked off and it wasn't opening those valves. So I think the reason that happened is, one, when you put these back together, it's a good idea before you put the valve covers back on. Like basically once you get the heads torqued down, the rockers, you've got to put your valve train in it. You turn the engine over by hand with like a breaker bar, and what that allows you to do is just make sure that everything is seated on the valve train. So I'm thinking I had put an updated push rod in this, which I think they're like 40 or 50 thousandths shorter than the factory ones, and I'm thinking the lifter had to kind of prime up with oil to actually fully seat the push rod. So I'm thinking under initial startup it like kind of kicked it out of place. So that was my fault. Like I said, anytime you have an engine apart, you should just turn it over by hand, make sure everything looks good, and then that way when you go to actually crank it, everything's seated right. And that could have ended a lot worse. I could have had bent valves, bent push rods, but it didn't. Thank God for that. And yeah, so that was the only 2 problems I had during assembly. And then I guess on the road, I don't know, I've had 2 issues. One, actually last week I had the injector number 2 go out, and that was the one that I actually replaced the plug on. So if you watch my last video, I was kind of showing some of the parts in that, and I put a new, I had someone put a plug on it because I don't really mess with those small, pin style connectors. And I think it was like an electrical issue. So I ended up replacing that. I had to buy that from Ford. It was like number 2 is front driver side. And then I had this boot or this pipe slip out, and you can kind of see my fix right there. I've got these 2 nuts are just kind of acting as spacers because the threads were actually stripped. I thought I had it tight, and when I took off down the road it just slipped right off. So I came back, threw those on. I should get a new clamp for that. But yeah, those were the only 2 issues as far as once I got the truck back together. The heads checked out. I didn't have to have any machining done. They were flat. They weren't warped at all. So I was able to save a little bit of money on that and time, because I didn't have to deal with taking it to a machine shop. And then let's see what else. Oh, the high pressure oil pump. In one of my videos, I think it'd be like 2 videos back, I kind of showed some of my parts, and I had ordered what's called an STC fitting, and the STC fitting is what actually pumps oil from, I think it pumps it, it goes out the back of the pump and then out to the branch tubes, and that's what feeds your injectors. Well, I actually have the new style pump. So the new pump or no, I have the old style pump. What am I saying? So the old style pump doesn't use an STC fitting. So I didn't end up using that. They have what's called like a J tube, but I went off of the build dates. So like any website you go on will have like build dates for parts. Okay, so if your truck's built at this day or before or after, it tells you what to get. Well, all of them were wrong, because basically if you have an 0304, you have an old style pump. If you have a 05 to 07, you have a new style pump. So the old pumps take a J tube, the new pumps take an STC fitting. And so I didn't end up doing that. It was on the weekend. I didn't really feel like taking the time to order it. So I think what I'm going to do is, in the next couple of years, the turbo definitely has to be replaced. I mean, it's got a little bit of play to it. I'm thinking I could get a couple years out of it, but whenever I end up doing that, I'm going to probably put a Power Max in it too. But when that's out of the way, the high pressure oil pump is just right there to work on, so I'll go ahead and have the right seal kit and parts for it, and I'll replace that at that time. But for now, it should be pretty good. I went on some forums and they say usually the J tube lasts about 200,000 on those trucks. Some people get more, but they're a little bit more consistent than the STC fittings that can kind of fail at different mileages. And I might do the pump too. I don't know. I'll just kind of think about it at that time. But I think I'm going to end up putting a pump in it when I do it, just because the factory pumps on the old style, the pump actually can turn in the housing and then it loses pressure. So I think I might do it. It's a work truck. I need it to run. I mean, everybody wants their stuff to be reliable, but especially when you're actually using it to make money, it's it's not fun when you break down. So I think that was it really with the engine. The only thing I have to do though is, you can kind of see my coolant is a little bit clear because I topped it with water. There's a little bit of coolant in there, but the temperatures are starting to drop, so I got to get some coolant back in there. I just put water in it because if I had to take it back apart, I didn't have to try to catch the coolant, so I have to drain it back out and put some fresh coolant in it. And the only other, I guess, upgrade I've done is, you can see this big red wire right here. It's a 0 gauge wire, and this alternator I put on back in I think late winter, early spring, some point. It's a 200 amp mean green. It's been working really good. Puts a lot more power than the factory one. I think the factory alternator is like only 110 amps on this truck. There's, I think, a 130 on some. But basically, anytime you go with this big of an alternator, you can see the factory wire, how small it is right here compared to this one. I don't even know what gauge that is. It's just not set up to flow that much power. So anytime you go with a big alternator, you upgrade your wiring. It's got a 250 amp fuse in that little clear case there, and it definitely charges a lot better. Like, it without the wiring, it definitely charged better, but once I added that wire, it probably gained about like 0.3 0.4 volts, which is pretty good. So it holds closer to 14, pretty much 14 now. And I do snowplow with it, so you want to have a good alternator, good set of batteries on these trucks, especially with the Fickum, because if you don't keep your electrical system up, I mean, you're gonna have issues. Yeah, I think that's really all I've added to the truck, besides all the updates I've done with the head gaskets. I think that was the only thing I've done to it since then. I did have to replace my back shocks, but besides that, everything's good to go. But yeah, I think that's gonna wrap it up for today, guys. If you guys have any questions about the assembly or anything like that, just leave a comment down below. See you guys next time. Make sure you like and subscribe, and thanks for watching Spool Monster TV.